Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Tuesday afternoon. And today we have a little bit of Olympic basketball that we are going to talk about. There's not really much going on in the NBA, with off-season stuff. So for the first segment, I'm going to talk about the most recent men's basketball games that ended up happening today, early in the morning. The first game started at 5, then the next game started at 11, and now there's a game currently going on that I'm actually watching, Japan against France, and the score is a lot closer than what I thought. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the first two games than the third game that's going on right now. I'll save that for a later segment, probably the fourth segment whenever it ends and I can actually gather my thoughts. But then in the second segment, I'm going to talk about some of the Olympic athletes that have NBA experience, whether they have been in the league, whether they are in the league, or whether or not they just don't have NBA experience. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that and just my thoughts on it. And then in the third segment, I'm going to go over the women's standings, where the women stand in their little group stage as well, because they're doing the same group stages, but obviously there are different teams within every single respective group. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that in the third segment, and then, as I said before, in the fourth segment I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up and just give all my thoughts on this French and Japan game, because right now the score is 76-77 in favor of France. So we also have a special fifth segment at the end that I like to reveal at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please go ahead, use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. It really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCpodcast.net. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and get into this next segment as Japan scores a bucket to take the lead 78-77. So basically this game, I should say these games, my bad, I'm thinking this is the fourth segment already. But aside from that, these games, they were rather close. I'll definitely say that. They were definitely a lot closer than what you would expect, let's say, for example, a USA blowout would be. You wouldn't, when other national teams are going up against other national teams, the skill is roughly more or less, going to be the same, more or less. Again, it happens sometimes where it's the talent is just overwhelmingly much or significantly better than another foreign country, but most of the times that's not really the case, especially between Canada and Australia. Now, between all of the national teams, both of these rosters are almost loaded with NBA talent. A majority of these players have either had NBA experience or are in the NBA currently right now. Then they're arguably the two best teams in the Group A stages. Arguably. Again, it's not, that's still up for debate now because of just how the standings work and things like that. But for the most part, they're rather competitive. And if there was any other team that wasn't the French team that I thought could beat the United States, it would be either one of these teams down here that would have arguably the best chances of beating them. And that's really saying something, because remember, this team is composed of just so much NBA talent that it's you'd have to be a very talented team just to just to be able to knock out Team USA. So with this score right here, it's 93-83. So therefore the standings in the Group A are looking like first place Canada. They now have a point differential of 17, and for Australia, they moved to 1-1, which I believe is going to be ranked second still, because despite losing by 10, they still have a +2 point differential. And then the other game that ended up happening before the Canada against Australia game happened was Spain and Greece. Now, Spain ended up winning 84-77, which would mean that Greece is now all the way like at the bottom of the Group A standings, and they have a minus. Let me just do quick math real quick. They have a minus 14 in terms in point differential, and the Spanish team, they still have a minus in point differential, but it's not as much as minus 12 as they had previously. So they're still at the bottom of the Group A stages. Meanwhile, Australia and Japan are in the top two phases of the group stage. Now, that's just, a little analysis of what's been going on. And one of the better players in this game between Spain and Greece was Giannis Antetokounmpo. Again, just a phenomenal athlete. 27 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 assists. Now, this Greek team is more and more so looking like, the Serbian team, where it's like you can't really do anything without having Giannis on the court. I mean, like the amount of scoring divided amongst the Greek starters, it's not all that much. Like, it was really Giannis doing all of the work, and even then, even with his ridiculous, 27 points on 70% shooting from the field, like, that wasn't enough. And it just goes to show you just, like, the talent that the Spanish roster has, and how much the lack of and how little talent the Greek team actually has. Because other than Giannis Antetokounmpo scoring 27, the only other player that scored in double digits was Vasilis Toliopoulos. Again, forgive me if I completely botched that name. But some of the other players, like, for example, Nick Calathes, he played 32 minutes and he was only scoring 8 points on 3 for 12 shooting. Like, that is not ideal, and that is not really going to end up, helping this Greek national team. It's just not. Like, and it's not really looking good for them, because not only are they all the way at the bottom of the standings, but their point differential is, like, it's really starting to lack as well, because they keep losing these games they didn't lose the game in a blowout, but they keep losing these games by a significant amount of points. It's not really the same as losing by maybe like 2 or losing by 1, because, like, if you lose by 1, then your point differential doesn't really drop all that much. But losing by several or so points, and then that's where stuff really hits the fan. And speaking of stuff hitting the fan, right now the French team is down 77-78 with 1 minute and 50 seconds left. So I'll let you guys know just, like, the results of this game. Victor Wembanyama's, like, he's been doing Victor Wembanyama things, but the rest of the team is sort of not really helping him. Like, at least from what I've seen. I haven't really been able to check the box scores because I've been doing this, but I'm gonna do that right now. Let's see. So right now Victor has 10 points. Evan Fournier has 11. Matthew Strazel also has 11. But obviously Victor isn't trying to, take up all of the spotlight. It's ridiculous how he's, like, not trying to, but he is still playing, hyper efficient, and he's still getting his rebounds. He's actually getting a lot more assists than I would expect him to, and he has a much higher efficiency rating than what you would usually expect. Now, between the the Canada and the Australian game, the best player for the team and for the game was arguably RJ Barrett. He ended the game with 24 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists to help solidify Canada as the best team in the Group A standings. So right now they're in first place, as I mentioned before. And obviously, like, aside from RJ Barrett being, a scoring monster with 24 points, SGA ended up getting 16 points on 8 for 10 shooting, and Dylan Brooks also ended up getting 16 points on 5 for 9 shooting. And, like, just unfortunately, like, not all the NBA players, obviously, like, they're not all going to play great at the same time. Jamal Murray still seems to be trying to figure it out, because he only ended the game with 5 points on 2 for 7 from the field, so still has to figure some things out over there. And Jock Landale for the Australian team ended up getting 16 points, 7 for 10 shooting from the field. And Josh Giddey, he also ended up getting 19 points, 7 of 14 shooting from the field, but it wasn't enough to beat the Canadian team with all of the scoring prowess that they have. it's a little bit off. Like, it's a little bit weird seeing SGA put up a stat line where he doesn't score 30-something points. But, that's usually what happens. And right now, Nicholas Batum is sitting on the bench because he is bleeding. Okay, that is definitely something that's going to be worth talking about later. Right now, Japan has the ball 78-77, and someone just laid the ball up over Victor. That is very scary. There have been several players who just refused to lay the ball up right in front of Victor when Victor's in front of him, and now Victor has Rudy Gobert to help out with him as well. So that was a very important shot that he needed to make, and Evan Fournier just hit another very important shot to tie the game with being 80-80. And honestly, those were all the games that ended up happening while most of you people were probably asleep. There is another game after this French and Japan basketball game that's going to happen between Brazil and Germany. They're going to play later at 3 o'clock, I believe. So that's when the next game is going to go down. But so far, this is a very, very competitive game between France and Japan, and it's tied up 80 with 47 seconds left to go. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end off, and stop talking about this segment right now. And then in the second segment, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the Olympic athletes that have NBA experience or that were in the NBA, because that was a topic of conversation early in the Olympics that I didn't really get to address, but I would like to right now. So I will be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to be talking about the Olympic athletes that have NBA level experience, NBA level talent. And right now, oh my God, the score is 82-80 in favor of Japan, and 16 seconds left. Ooh, it's getting good. This game could go into overtime, but this would be a huge upset for the French national team. And the fact that Japan is I thought this game was going to be a blowout for France, but right now it's not really looking good for them. And they're losing in the home court. This is really bad. This could be really bad for France. But aside from that, before I begin with this next segment, I'd like to remind everybody to please go ahead and to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCpodcast.net. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and go into this second segment. Well, right now, Japan is up 84-80. And there is 16 seconds left to go in the fourth quarter. So this is a huge possession coming in from France. They need to get a score, and then they desperately need to foul, and then hope that someone misses a free throw, and then try to win the game later in the end. But aside from that, let's go right ahead and talk about some of these NBA these Olympic athletes. I keep saying NBA players. Let's talk about these Olympic athletes that have NBA level experience. There we go. That's so much better than what I was saying before. Now, there's a lot of them. Obviously, you have the entire United States roster that is composed of NBA players. I mean, if you don't know who they are, Steph, Anthony Edwards, LeBron, Kevin Durant, Derek White, Halliburton, Jason Tatum, Joel, you guys should all know exactly who those guys are. So I'm not really going to focus on them, but rather the other Olympic teams that are playing as well. Now, aside from the United States, another team that is loaded with NBA talent is Canada. Now, they aren't really that, how should I say, as iconic as Team USA, and not every single one of those players are all-stars in the NBA, right? So but still, having NBA, oh my gosh, France just made an and one three-pointer. Okay, but after that happened, the skill gap between these kinds of players on the roster and USA's kind of players on the roster, they aren't really the same. So, but Jesus, that was a crazy clutch three to tie up the game. So the Canadian team, they have Dort, Luguentz Dort. He's currently in the NBA right now. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, another player that's in the NBA right now. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, arguably their best player and their best player for, the NBA. And in the NBA, he was an MVP caliber player last season, was second in voting, I believe. Either second or third, maybe behind. I know he was behind Jokic. He probably could have been behind Luka towards the end, but next player is Jamal Murray. He is, he is a teammate for Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets. And there we go. France has just tied it up with 10 seconds left to go in the fourth. We might have overtime. This is exactly why I saved this, this game recap for the fourth segment instead of the third segment, because I wasn't sure whether or not this game would even end in regulation. So, Dwight Powell, he's another player on the Canadian team. Trey Lyles, another player on the Canadian team that has NBA experience and is currently in the NBA right now. RJ Barrett, Kelly Olynyk. Some of the two, if you guys aren't really casual fans, you're gonna know who RJ Barrett and Kelly Olynyk are. Maybe not so much if you were a casual, but if you aren't, then you're gonna know who Kelly Olynyk is, and you should know who RJ Barrett is. Now, Andrew Nembhard and Dillon Brooks. Now, if you're a casual, I feel like you're going to know exactly who Dillon Brooks is, because he's essentially the NBA's villain, arguably one of the most annoying players ever, just because of the way that he acts. It's really, I'm not a fan of him. I'm really not a fan of what he does, how he tries to just be a Hall of Fame hater. And I'm not saying that just to hate. He is literally a Hall of Fame hater. He literally said that, LeBron wasn't going to score 40 on him, maybe if he was, in his prime, but, LeBron ended up smacking him out of the first round anyway. But, he's one of those players where it's it's all bark and no bite, and it's really annoying. Next player on this list is Khem Birch. Now, he's not in the NBA now, but he used to be an NBA player with NBA level experience. And the last player is Melvin Ejim. Again, forgive me if I completely botched that name, but he is the only player on the Canadian national team that has never played in the NBA. And right now, Japan is going to walk up, heat check, and he missed. Okay. And then the game is going into overtime. And the player that shot the ball, he has 25 plus points, so that was either going to go in or it was going to miss. And I have no problem with him taking that shot with how he was playing. So, because he was wasting a lot of time. It's not like they really had a play drawn up. So he was just walking down the court and then shot the three. And it was he just missed. But now this game is going into overtime. So Team Australia, they have Dyson Daniels, Josh Giddey, Patty Mills, Josh Green, and Joe Ingles, they all Dante Exum, they all have NBA level experience. And if you're not a casual, and maybe even you are casual, you probably know who Dante Exum is. You probably know, if you've been watching the NBA for a long time, then you'll definitely know who Patty Mills is, and you'll definitely know who Exum is. And if you're relatively new, you'll probably know who Giddey is. I'm pretty sure everyone knows who Giddey is because of the thing that he does, but I'm not really going to talk about that. So there's also Duop Reith. You're probably not going to know who he is, but he is in the NBA. Same with Jock Landale. And Matthew Dellavedova, he used to have NBA experience. Right now, he's not on an NBA currently. Like, he's not on an NBA team currently, but he used to play with LeBron and the Cavs, and he was best known as the Curry stopper in 2016. Like, he was playing some really good defense on Steph. Either that or Steph was just playing some really bad offense. You guys make do with what you want with that. So then there's also Will McNay, who is a former NBA player. And finally, Nick Kay and Jack McVeigh. Those are the only two players that don't have NBA level experience. And that's it for Team Australia. Next is Team France. They have a couple of players, not the entire roster though. Frank Ntilikina, forgive me if I completely messed up that name. Nicholas Batum, Evan Fournier, Rudy Gobert, and of course Victor Wembanyama. And finally Bilal Koulibaly. Those guys are all NBA players, the players that I just mentioned. Gershon Yabusele, again forgive me if I completely botched that last name. Nando De Colo, those two guys are former NBA players, and the final four players have never played in the NBA. Andrew Albisi, Isaiah Cordinier, Matthias Lazort, and Matthew Strazel. Now, why am I talking about all of this? Well, recently there was a little bit of a debate, like how people are arguing whether the Avengers now are, that the same caliber as the Dream Team, and since LeBron's on this team, leading this team, everyone's going to compare it to Michael Jordan's Olympic team. And I just wanted to, there was the point put out there, like, yes, well, Team USA was ridiculously dominant back then with Jordan on the Dream Team. Let's not act like the rest of the world was on the same caliber as NBA players. Like, because that's just not true. There are more NBA players in this Olympics now than there has ever been before. And because of that, that is going to, give these international teams a better chance of winning the gold. Because, as every year goes, basketball is like the United States' sport to lose. Like, they never lose in basketball. United States barely ever loses in basketball. And for both men and women. So, for Serbia, Filip Petrovic is an NBA player. Nikola Jovic, another NBA player. Bogdan Bogdanovic, Nikola Jokic, obviously, and Vasilik Mikic. They're all, forgive me if I botch their last names, but they're all NBA players. And Marko Guduric is the only player on the team that used to be in the NBA but isn't on the NBA, and the rest of the players have never played in the NBA. Santi Aldama, he is an NBA player as well. He plays for the Spanish national team. Usman Garuba, he is another NBA player. He plays for the Spanish team. And then the rest of the players for the Spanish team are former NBA players, but they obviously have NBA experience. Lorenzo Brown, Rudy Fernandez, Juan Hernan Gomez, Willie Hernan Gomez, and Alex Abrines. So, those guys, they all have NBA level talent. And the rest of the players on the roster, Jamie Pradilla, Isabi Lopez Arostegui, forgive me if I completely mess up their names, Dario Brizuela, that's funny, Alberto Diaz, and Sergio Lol. They're all players that do not have NBA level experience. Now, with Germany, Franz Wagner, Daniel Theis, Mo Wagner, and Dennis Schroeder, they're all NBA players, and they all have NBA level experience. And a former NBA player on that squad, Isaac Bonga, he used to play in the NBA, and he was there for a little bit, but obviously, he wasn't there for a long time. And the rest of the players have never played in the NBA. Now, here we're moving on to, some of the teams that only have like, one or two NBA level, talent. So Gui Santos, he is the only NBA player on the Brazilian team. Cristiano Felicio, Didi Luzada, Marcelo Huertes, Raul Neto, and Bruno Caboclo, excuse me, forgive me if I messed up all of those names. They're all former NBA players, and the rest of the players have no NBA experience. For South Sudan, Wenyan Gabriel and JT Thor are the only players that have NBA experience, and Carlick Jones and Mariel Shayok were former NBA players. So actually, my bad, 4 players had NBA experience. For Puerto Rico, only Jose Alvarado is on an NBA team right now, and the rest of the players, Devon Reed, Alim Ford, Gian Clavel, Tremont Waters, they're all former NBA players, and then the rest of the players on the list have no NBA experience at all. Now, with Greece, Giannis Antetokounmpo is the only one on the Greece national team that is in the NBA currently, and it explains, why he's had to carry the team the way that he's had to carry the team. Now, Nick Calathes, Georgios Papagiannis, Papagiannis, that's funny, and Kostas Papanikolaou. Those are the only few players that have NBA experience, and they're they formally played in the NBA. And finally, we have Japan. And they only have 2 NBA players and 2 players with NBA experience, Roy Hachimura and Yuta Watanabe. Aside from those 2 players, Japan has nobody else that has been in the NBA or is on the NBA right now. So those are all of the teams in the Olympics, and that's every single one of them that has there's an injury on the floor for Japan right now, but that's every single one of them that has NBA talents and NBA caliber players on their rosters. So really shows just how competitive the Olympics have become for basketball, and really that the world is sort of catching up with the United States. So just wanted to go ahead and do all of that for you guys in this segment. So now we will go ahead and go into the third segment, which is going to be focused on the women's side of the Olympics, women's basketball, because I haven't really talked about them, at all in any of these segments. So I'm just going to go ahead and just give a recap of all of the games that went down, as well as the group standings, where every single team stands, and all of the important stuff that you guys would need to know. I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about the women's side of basketball, and just how the women's standings are for the Olympics, because all of the first games ended up being played. There was a 3-on-3 women's segment that was happening while while this game is going on as well. I don't know if you guys are relatively interested in the 3-on-3 action. I haven't really touched any 3-on-3 Olympic basketball, but if you guys want me to touch on the 3-on-3 Olympic basketball, then I will go ahead and talk about that. But essentially, the 3-on-3, it's literally just a 3-on-3 pickup game. There is no coach, so you just put any kind of either women or men basketball player onto the court, and they play in a 3-on-3, and they have to just play a regular 3-on-3. And so I'm not really going to focus on that as much as I'm going to focus on the 5-on-5 action. And by the way, the French national team is up 92-84 in overtime. So I just want to go ahead and talk about that. And this guy on Japan is just not missing. Like, somebody give this man a contract. Like, what? He is not missing. I mean, he's short for a guard, but he just is hitting every single shot. Number 5 for Japan. Go look him up, please. But aside from that, let's go ahead and talk about the women's side of basketball and their standings. So, unlike the men's stages, they have their own groupings, yes, but the women's stages and their groupings, they're a little bit different, right? So it's like, how in the for the men's basketball, the United States, they have to have South Sudan in the same group as they do. The women, on the other hand, they don't have South Sudan in their group, and there is no South Sudan anywhere on this list. They did not even qualify to play for the Olympics, on the women's side at least. So basically, for USA basketball, Aja Wilson and Brenna Stewart, they were the leaders of the United States basketball team. They combined for 46 points and 21 rebounds, 7 assists, and 7 blocks to start off Group C play. And all of the games, they are already concluded, so we're just waiting until tomorrow for those games to resume yet again. Aja Wilson led United States with 24 points, with 13 rebounds and 4 blocks, while Stewart ended up getting 22 points and 8 rebounds. And it's like the United States team is so much better than all of the other teams that they ended up blowing out they're the only team that, actually, no, I lied. They aren't the only team, but they're one of the very few teams that ended up blowing out their opposition in these games. So for Group A, the teams that are in Group A are Serbia, Puerto Rico, Spain, and China. Those are the teams in the Group A in the standings. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up this graph right here. Those are the standings right now. Then in the Group B standings, you have, I believe, in the Group B standings, yes, you have France and Canada, as well as Nigeria and Australia. And then finally in the Group C standings, you have the United States, Germany, Belgium, and Japan. And yes, Belgium, they're one of those teams that, they didn't qualify for the men's, but, they qualified for the women's. So just shows how different the way that it works and things like that. So for this one, Serbia and Puerto Rico, Serbia ended up taking, the win against Puerto Rico. This is the only group A is the only group where the point differential is not all that much. Like, you can see that the point differential is nothing but single digits for all of these teams. So Serbia, they ended up playing Puerto Rico, and they ended up winning by only 3 points, which obviously, that is enough. A win is a win. And then Spain ended up playing China, and Spain ended up winning by just 1 point. The final score was 90-89, and since they were able to win by 1 point, they were able to get in a better spot in the standings. So Spain, they the only problem now is if either of these teams end up losing in a blowout, that could drop their point differential dramatically, and it could affect their entire spot in the standings. So no one in this group is safe. Group A is arguably, the most hostile group right now. Now, next group on this list is Group B with France, Nigeria, Australia, and Canada. France, they ended up playing Canada in this matchup. They ended up winning 75-54, which in turn gives France a 21-point differential, and Canada a minus 21-point differential. And of course, Canada is going to be at the bottom of this list, and at the bottom of the Group B standings, because the Nigerian team ended up surprisingly beating the Australian team by 13 points. The score was 75-62 in favor of Nigeria. So now Nigeria, they hold a spot in the group standings, and because unlike the previous standings, these ones right here, all of these are blowouts. So even if France were to lose by a couple of points, their point differential would still keep them on top of the standings, just in case, there's a team that gets tied, right? Now, finally, the Group C stages, which is, arguably, the best group stage ever, because they have the United States. They have, and as always, with the United States and United States basketball, the United States is at number one. Like, as always, as I say it every single time, because, the women's side of basketball, it's almost guaranteed. As much as the men are guaranteed, the women are guaranteed a gold medal at least, 2 times over. They're that good. And so they had a point differential of plus 26. They beat the Japanese team by 26 points. It was 102-76. They were the only team in the entire Olympics so far to have 100 points. And this is just I believe this gets marked as their 56. Yeah, this was United States' 56th consecutive Olympic win for the women's national team. And that just shows you just how dominant this women's basketball team has always been throughout the history of basketball. They just always win, and it's rare that they lose to anyone. And obviously Germany, they ended up playing Belgium, and Germany ended up winning by 14 points. And Belgium, since they lost by 14, they're lucky that they weren't going up against the United States, because their point differential would have dropped dramatically. And the United States, they're just always, especially on the women's side, they're just better. There's nothing else that can really be said other than, the fact that they're just better. Now, unlike what most people think, they are not just better just because they're American. That's not what I'm saying. They're just better, period. They're athletes. And on top of that, one thing that I should note is that the athleticism on the women's basketball team for the United States is just so much better and full of much more talent than the Japanese team, because Brittany Griner, so much taller than every other female on the Japanese team. It was just the height difference was staggering. And it's she's gonna rack up one of these games. She's gonna rack up a lot of blocks against these teams, and it's it's really it's ridiculous. It's honestly ridiculous, how the height difference between the United States athletes, some of the United States athletes are compared to the Japanese athletes. So with that out of the way, we are out of time for this third segment. So now I will go ahead and go to the fourth segment, where I talk about the French game that just ended up happening and just ended up concluding. I'll talk about the stats, talk about some of the best players that were performing in this game, as well as what I saw from, the brief few seconds that I was able to just look at the TV and watch right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned for my thoughts.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to be talking about the French national team beating the Japanese national team in this most recent matchup. I'm just moving the title over to the middle just so you guys can see. And for those of you guys on the audio side, you guys obviously aren't going to really see that, but that's besides the point. So since this is for those of you guys, on the stream, and those of you guys that are watching the video, this literally just ended right now, so I do not have a graphic set up for the best players on the team, but I do have the box scores of the game, and I've also, I have enough knowledge to talk about this game right here, right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So this game at first, like at the beginning, I thought this game was going to be a blowout for France. Like I really thought that this game was just easy for France. It was like almost too easy for them, and I thought that Japan was really going to struggle in this game, but that turned out not being the case whatsoever. And France almost lost this game. They almost lost this game. If it wasn't for I believe it was Matthew Strazel. If it wasn't for him hitting a ridiculous and one 3-pointer that ended up tying the game, they would never have gone into overtime, and they would have never had enough time to win the game in the end. And they ended up winning 94-90. Which is just, it's really, it's concerning if you are, a French fan, because it's, you almost lost to Japan, and you have Victor Wembanyama. Victor didn't play that bad. I'm not saying that he played bad. 18 points and 11 rebounds and 6 assists. That is not bad at all. But it was really, the efficiency, 6 for 13 from the field, that was really questioning. Especially considering how much of a height advantage he had over every single athlete on Japan. And as I mentioned before, Japan, they do have NBA talent, but again, it's not the same amount of talent as the French national team has. And aside from Victor and Strazel, there was not really much support coming in from the rest of the players. Evan Fournier was playing pretty well, but he shot 5 for 18 and ended up shooting more shots than he did scoring points. And aside from those two players, nobody really stepped up, and it was bad for them, because at one point Japan just refused to miss. They refused to miss 3-pointers. I don't know what it was. I don't know what they were doing, but Japan shot 43% from the 3-point line in this game. And is that Simone Biles? No, that's not Simone Biles. I apologize. The broadcast changed to something completely different after the basketball game, because again, the next basketball game isn't until 3:00. Now, again, as I was mentioning before, the Japanese national team, they were just hitting all of their shots. They were hitting so many 3-pointers in this game and at arguably really bad times for France. They were hitting the right 3-pointers at the right time, and it caused France to get into a hole, and they were lucky that they were even able to win and send it to overtime. That 3-pointer was ridiculous. It was a pump fake, and then he shot off balance, obviously contested because it was an and one, and he made it. It was crazy shot. And what's really unfortunate was that it wasted a dominant performance from Yuki Kawamura. Again, I had no idea who he was up until now, but look him up, because he played phenomenally. He had 29 points and was 6 of 15 from 3, ended up getting 6 assists as well as 7 rebounds. And Roy Hachimura, one of the very few NBA players on the roster, ended up getting 24 points, was shooting 10 for 16 from the field, as well as 3 for 5 from 3, and 7 for 11 from within inside the arc. Excuse me. And again, this game, it was just it was back and forth throughout the entirety of the game. There was not one point where France had a big lead, or there was not one point where Japan had a big lead. It was a very back and forth game. Obviously they would go on runs, but after the team went on the run, the other team would respond right back. Now, this doesn't really affect the standings as of right now. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So with this win, France is now 2-0. They're the only team in the Group B standings that has won 2 games, but that is only because the Germany and Brazil haven't played yet. They play at 3 o'clock. But as of the standings and where they're at right now, France is still at number 2. Actually, wait, no, I lied. They move up to the number 1 spot because they're 2-0, but their point differential doesn't move. It barely moves. So it's like their point differential before it was plus 12. Now it's plus 16. And if Germany ends up beating the Brazilian team, it doesn't matter by how much they beat them by. As long as they win, they are still going to be in the number 1 spot because their point differential is plus 20. They beat Japan by 20 points. So their point differential is so much higher than France's point differential that the only thing that would really affect their standing is if they lose. If they lose a game, then they will most likely be moved down to either the 2nd or the 3rd standings, because it really depends on how much they lose by. Like, they could lose this next game by 2 points, and they would be fine. They would be totally fine from, like, they would completely avoid going underneath the 2nd seed. Like, they would be the 2nd seed because their point differential is just so much better than Brazil's point differential. So they would have the same record as Brazil if they were to lose, because Brazil ended up losing to France in the previous game by 12. So that's sort of like, you know, an interesting thing with the standings. Like, all Germany has to do is win, and if they win this game, they'll still hold that number 1 spot in the standings. So, just a little bit of food for thought. And obviously, you know, you would want to win every single game in a blowout, but that's not really going to happen that much. And it's sort of, you'll play better knowing that even if you lose, your spot still isn't going to get affected because you're just going to move down in the postseason rankings just by 1, and it's not even by all that much. Now, I don't know how this is going to affect, like, you know, after the group stages are over. Like, I don't know how the standings are going to work, but I'll explain them when I do figure that out. But essentially, yeah, that's like all the news that you really need from this game. So France right now, they're the number 1 spot, the number 1 seed in their group, and in Group B. So now all that's left is for Germany to play this game, and most likely they're going to beat the Brazilian team. That's my prediction, and that's what I think is going to happen. But let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen between Germany and Brazil, because, you know, Brazil, they don't really have that much NBA talent, or as much compared to Germany and their NBA talent. Now, they're both one of those teams that have fewer talents than than the rest of the teams. But aside from Spain, Serbia, France, Australia, Canada, United States, they aren't really like up there in terms of, you know, NBA caliber talent. And, well, I'm talking about Brazil, by the way. Now, for Germany, they do have, like, you know, a couple of NBA talented players, which is why I think, you know, they're just naturally going to have a much better advantage going into this game. So I don't think there's really anything that the French team should worry about. I don't think there's anything that Germany should worry about, because these few games, like, you know, they're gonna win out. I really feel like both of these guys, like, the only time that they'll probably lose is if they go up against each other. But aside from that, I have no thoughts on this game, and really just waiting to see how Germany plays against the French team, because that's really, like, in that entire Group B phase, that is probably, you know, going to be the matchup, like the best matchup of matchups. Rojali's in the chat saying, great analysis. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So now we will go ahead and go into the final segment, which is, you know, it's the 5th segment, and I'm just going to give my predictions on some of these games that are going to happen later today. Well, the only game that's going to happen later today, as well as the games that are happening tomorrow, because I didn't talk about that in the previous segment. So I will be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned for my thoughts. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the future games that are going to be happening today and tomorrow, and just my thoughts and opinions on those games, who I think is going to come out on top, and who I think is going to end up, who I think is going to end up winning. Now, I'm going to be right back. I'm going to go ahead and get that. Actually, wait, no, it just stopped. Perfect. All right, so anyways, the next games that are happening are going to be the Group C phases. All of the Group A games are done, and we have one more Group B game that needs to get finished. France, at the time of this video, France and Japan, they already played, and now all that's left is Brazil and Germany. So, at least in the Group B phases, in the Group B stages, that's all that's left. So, Brazil and Germany, obviously, as I mentioned before, the Brazilian team doesn't really have as much NBA talent as the German team. And because they don't have that same caliber of talent, I think that Germany's, just the fact that they have NBA players and players with NBA level experience, I think that's just going to be enough to beat this Brazil team that only has a couple of players and not really that many players that can go toe-to-toe with them, at least, from what I'd expect from players that don't have NBA experience. Obviously, it's a big world, so not everyone is going to get drafted to the NBA. Not everyone is going to get recognized by NBA scouts, and not everyone is going to be looking for players in Brazil or in any place for that matter for NBA talented players. And most of the scouting is going to be done in the United States because there's so much talent in the United States. But it's a big, big world out there. And it's there's so many players in previous history that could have been NBA caliber talent, but just, didn't get selected or just didn't want to partake in it. So it's there's so many players that aren't in the NBA, but they could arguably be better than some NBA talented players, right? So obviously, those are few and far in between, but they do exist. For example, there was a Sabonis. He was a player on the Portland Trailblazers, and for most of his career, he played in Russia, right? And because he was playing in Russia, which I believe was the Soviet Union at the time, and yeah, obviously, I'm sure you guys know the history. United States and USSR, they have fantastic history. I'm sure you guys know that. But it's he was not allowed to play in the NBA because of reasons. And he's one of those players that arguably could have been so talented in the NBA. And it's we never really got to see that for the prime of his years. We got to see that for just a little bit, but not for his prime years. And so players like that, like him, they could still exist now. They could have existed then, and they could exist in the future, and we would have no idea about it because of reasons. And reasons that they could be any kind of reason. I'm not going to get into those reasons, but so it is definitely possible that, and Brazil, they actually have this one athlete that has the most points in the history of basketball. Or they had this athlete, he was from Brazil. So it's after LeBron reached Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's points and production scoring, not really his production scoring, but after LeBron reached his points, right, and surpassed Kareem in points, there was now another player left to surpass, and that was this, I forgot his name, but he was from Brazil, and I kid you not, he had so many more points, and look, it's Simone Biles. But yeah, he had so many more points than LeBron, and it was they're just trying to move the goalpost on him. But aside from that, it's there could be talent anywhere, and that's really all that I wanted to get at. But despite that, I don't think Germany's going to lose to the Brazilian team. I genuinely don't. But that's just me. But Let me know in the comments what sport you guys are watching for the Olympics. There's apparently breakdancing. That's a sport in the Olympics, so it's kind of interesting. And obviously, Simone Biles, one of the more popular Olympic athletes in period, actually, now that I think about it. But so aside from this game that's happening today, the final game that's happening, there's also 2 games happening tomorrow, and those 2 games are both in the Group C standings. So you have Puerto Rico against Serbia and United States against South Sudan. It should also be noted that depending on how much Germany wins by, it doesn't matter. As long as they win, they're going to make it back to the top seed in their group. Now, if they lose, it depends on how much they lose by, because then Brazil might be able to overtake them in the point differential. So, it's like it's a double-edged sword. You got to be able to, you could win or you could lose, but it's like it depends on how much you lose by. But obviously, you'd want to win if you're Germany, just so you could secure that number 1 spot. So for the Group C stages, we have Puerto Rico and Serbia. They're going to be playing at 11:15, and United States going up against South Sudan yet again at 3 o'clock tomorrow. So obviously, Puerto Rico and Serbia, they're the lower end of the Group C stages. Like right now, they are the lower end of the Group C. And they're arguably some of the weakest teams in the Olympics right now. Like, if it wasn't for the United States being in this group, I wouldn't even consider this group as competitive. Because aside from, literally, the United States has more NBA talented players than the rest of these teams combined. And that's saying a lot, because like a lot of the teams that I mentioned before, they have more NBA talent than ever before. So the fact that United States still outnumbers the NBA talent amongst all of these teams is staggering. So Serbia, they have the worst point differential amongst the 2 of those teams. So really, this game between Puerto Rico and Serbia, there's really nothing left. There's really nothing to lose, I should say, because it doesn't matter if they win, then they move up, but they still have a really, really bad point differential. Like, Serbia's point differential is minus 26. So if they were to win and be 1-1, but if they were to only win by just a little bit, that's still not going to be enough to go up against, South Sudan, who, if I'm assuming, I think they're going to lose against the United States. But similar to the exhibition game that they played, I don't think they're going to lose by that much. So because South Sudan is most likely not going to lose by that much, their point differential is barely going to change. They're still going to be positive in the point differential. Serbia and Puerto Rico have to win by double digits, at least 11 points or more, in order to get somewhere in the point differential. They would both have to win by, Puerto Rico would have to win by 15 plus points if they, at least 15 plus points, if they want to even move up in the standings and have a chance. And Serbia, they would have to win by almost 30 points in order to do something major in their standings. Like, that's how much they would have to win by. Obviously, it's not determined by point. Is that Kelsey? My bad. I got distracted by someone who has a fantastic looking beard that looks like Jason Kelsey. But aside from that, yeah, the Serbian team and the Puerto Rican team, they have a very long way to go if they want to get back up there, in the point differential. Now, the United States, they got it easy. They won by 26 points in their last game, so their point differential is plus 26. So all they really have to worry about now is winning these games. As long as they can win all of the games, they will be fine. Now, they could afford to lose, but they could afford to lose by just a little bit, not that much. But again, they're most likely going to win. Now, South Sudan, they gave them difficulty in the last matchup, but in the last matchup, they did not have Kevin Durant. And I think Kevin Durant is really going to be a very big difference maker because, teams, they could arguably find a way to stop LeBron. They could find a way to stop LeBron, then they can't, by the way. They could, at some points, find a way to stop LeBron. They could stop a couple of other players, but when you have Kevin Durant, I think it's just way too much because you have to put, arguably, like, your tallest and strongest player on LeBron. But if you do that, who's going to guard Kevin Durant? Like, that's really how it goes. And with how tall Kevin Durant is, he barely misses over anyone. Like, he's not going to miss a jump shot over... Like, he's not going to... Well, I'm not going to say he's not going to miss, but he's not going to get contested by a jump shot. That's what I should say. But that's essentially, like, how the standings are going to look if this happens. So, really, it's just the battle of who gets the 1 and the 2 spot, between South Sudan and the United States. And, again, the United States, they don't really have to worry about much because their point differential is just so much greater. Even if they lose this game and let's say and one of those other teams wins, they'll still be so far ahead of the point differential that it really wouldn't even matter, and they would still make the Olympic, like, the cutoff, because obviously the cutoff is the 3rd seed. If you're in the 3rd seed or below, you're not making it farther. But that's essentially, like, what's going to happen. Again, the real matchup for today is going to be, Germany and Brazil, to see if Germany can still maintain that number 1 spot and number 1 seed by getting this win, and to see if Brazil can actually claw their way into the standings by winning by a lot and winning the game. So it's like, got to try to do that, because if they end up winning by a lot of points, like by 20 plus points, then they'll most likely end up, actually no, even if they win by 20 plus points, they wouldn't even end up in the second seed of their group. So it's like, it's really tough, like, just keeping track of all of these things, but it's like they would have to win by, I'd say, around 15 points. Actually, no, not even 15. They would have to win by at least 18 points in order to, like, affect the Group B standings. So if they brought their A game, that's great. But if they didn't, then it really wouldn't even affect the standings all that much. But that's besides the point. And, well, not really besides the point, but that's basically all that I have to talk about in this final segment. And that is it for the podcast for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. Really ups the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. The link is gsmcpodcast.net. That is all that I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't